Biden. Hey, welcome to our Vita Book Company book signing with Bronwen, Newcott, and my name is Lori Polydoros, and we both write for tweens, teens, and we are super excited to be here with you today. So we're going to talk a little bit about who we are, how we got into writing, a little bit about our books, and then we're going to do an interview with each other, kind of diving in deeper to who we are and why we write and what we write and all that good stuff. And then we'll read from our books at the very end, and then we're going to be outside doing book signings and all that good stuff. Sound good? Okay.
Yeah.
So my name's Lori. I am, like I said, a writer for kids. I do sort of everything. I do nonfiction, fiction. I started early on writing picture books, and I've done a lot of kind of freelance work. So I have a lot of books in the classrooms, fiction, nonfiction. I think about 80 now. But this book came out last spring, and this is my first commercial book. So I'm super excited to share that with you all. I'm also a high school English teacher and community college English teacher, yeah. And we'll talk more about that and how that connects to my writing. And I think I met Bronwen probably 5 years ago. Yeah, we belong to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and I met her one glorious day, and I have been really super excited to get to know her ever since. So I'm happy to be with you today. Yeah, so tell us about you.
My name is Bronwen Newcott, and I am a poet first. I ended up going to graduate school for poetry and have always loved kids' stories. And when my kids were small, I realized the stories I loved most that I had ever read in my life were the stories I read in these middle grades, kind of middle school books. Books that had a taste of magic in them, books that were adventures, books where there was something to be solved, which ends up kind of seeming how life is. So when Silas was small, he had to go to handwriting camp. So sorry. But he did have to. But he only went for a week. And on the drive, I started telling him a story to distract us both from the fact that he had to go to handwriting camp in the summer. And it started as just a story. And I kind of liked it. And I'd come home and type up whatever I told him in the car. And it built and built till it got to this magical point in the story that's pretty early on where a huge doorway appears and the little brother disappears. And I realized I had no idea what that door was, where they were going, what the story was about. And then I stopped telling the story. But Silas kept asking for it. And one day we met a graphic novelist who lived outside of DC and was doing a reading. And we went up and talked to him afterwards. And he was the one who encouraged me to outline the story first. And so Slow and Steady, this book was built. This story was built. And so then I started writing kids literature and realized I loved it. And I love being with kids. I taught high school English for a while and have taught art to all ages. And so being with people and sharing stories is something that I love. And then being able to do it in the form of a book that can go speak for itself has been really fun. So,
And I think we have, yes, let's give her a round of applause. I think we have so much in common. And I think a lot of artists, like so much of what you said, I'm like, oh yeah, me too, you know, and I think just like doing it because you love it and because you have people in your life that you do it for is such an important, valuable understanding, because as artists, as writers, you know, there's so much rejection, and we'll talk about rejection along the way. And so I think if you do it because it's in your heart and soul, like that's why we do it, right?
yeah. I tried to decide recently to stop writing because of the hard things we'll talk about, and it was impossible. It just feels like there's this itchy part of me if I am not writing. So then there just becomes a part where there are words that need to come out. They're just there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's start.
Okay.
You touched on a little bit of what I want to say already, but what is it specifically about Race to the Great Invention that like makes your heart sing? Like, what is it about this story that not only sparked you to tell it, but allowed you to move through this long process to it becoming a book that you can hold in your hand and share with people?
Well, I think one of the things that kept me writing this book was to find out what happened and how. And the book is actually set in the neighborhood where I grew up in Washington, D.C. And it was a book that as a child, I always felt like was an enchanted place. It still is one of my very favorite places on the planet. And it was a neighborhood of townhouses, and there are all these brick townhouses, and there were little alleys in the back. And those were very much a part of my life. And my brothers and I would go trash hunting, which is something that happens in the story. And I think this is kind of the story as a child I always waited to happen, was expecting would happen in my neighborhood, because it just felt like a place where there was something magical right on the edge of happening. And so Silas, for sure, was one of the things that kept me writing the book, because it helps to have someone asking you what happens next. And then also just discovering who these kids were and how they navigated this world that was familiar but also completely imagined. Yeah.
And I think like when you think about middle grade readers, so we write for like 8 to 12-year-olds for middle grade. It's that moment when you're old enough to understand the world, but you still have that inkling of, oh, there could be magic around the corner, right? And that's what I love to. I write fiction too, and that's absolutely what I love to write as well. Like, I don't like to write completely new fantastical worlds. Like, I want that magic happening like right here in the world, because I think it's like hope. It's like the hope of something more, you know, when you feel like life could be scary or dark. It's like, no, wait, you know, let's like open that door and see what's behind it. And I think that's something really magical about writing for this age group.
And there's still this expectation of goodness too.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? And like the unexpected is welcomed. Mm-hmm. You know, like when we get older, we kind of are like, we don't want surprises.
This is not what I planned on the calendar today.
And then sometimes surprises are scary, you know, but I think that moment in life is really magical. So do you want me to talk about this one then?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so this book kind of like, I've written 8 novels. None of them have sold yet. One of them helped me get an agent a few years ago, and you guys all probably know what an agent is. So basically, it's a literary agent helps you get published. But to get an agent, your work has to be already sellable. So it's kind of this catch-22. It's like, how do you get good enough to find an agent yet? You know, it's just tough industry. Sorry, dropping my mic. So this book, I had my agent. We weren't selling my novel yet. I was working out, listening to a podcast called The Big One. It's an NPR podcast about the big earthquake that is eventually coming to the West Coast. And episode 8 was all about women in earthquake science. And these women were incredible. They were brilliant. They were funny. They were tenacious. But they all had the same struggles as women in male-dominated fields. So I told my agent, this would be a great book for young adults, not only highlighting these women's lives, but teaching, you know, others about earthquake safety. And so she said, do it, write a proposal. Well, it took me a year to write a proposal. I had to not only plan out the entire book, I researched 3 of the scientists before COVID. So we were able to meet in person like real human beings. I had to look at all the other books that were similar and find out how they were selling. I had to do a sample chapter. So it took about a year. And I finally was able to get it out there in the world, and it found a home with Chicago Review Press, which is a smaller press, but they have a series called Women in Power. And this is one of 15 books now. And I didn't write the other ones, but they're all about women in film, women in extreme sports, women in earthquake science, women in animal science. Really amazing series. And I just fell in love with these 15 women, and they've become like a sisterhood to me. They are not only absolutely brilliant, like I said, but they are super passionate about helping us stay safe. I learned from them that earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, all of these things we consider disasters, but the disaster part comes because we're not prepared for them. A lot of these things are natural events, right? So they are very focused on using their science and their resilience to help us be safer. But they're also funny and they're adventurous and they all know each other. And they're just this really amazing group of women that support each other in their fields. And then it became like 16 of us, like promoting the book, and it became like a joint venture. And I've just been really proud of it. And even though fiction is where my heart is, like being able to, highlight these women who probably wouldn't have their stories told has been really fun and something I'm really proud of.
Well, I was going to ask you that. How was it for you coming from fiction and imagination to go into research? And it sounds relationally like it was great. But as far as the writing,
I got my degree in journalism. So I'm kind of comfortable writing in all genres. But I do love fiction because I'm figurative. I'm an English teacher. All of you guys know how your English teachers are. I love like metaphors and symbolism and all that stuff. But I think what helped me when I was a journalism major, I learned how to write and be concise, right? And so if you combine that with fiction writing, you're able to get a little bit better balance. But what I am is I'm nosy. I love asking questions and I love interviewing people. So that part was super fun for me. I think I interviewed 12 of them on Zoom during the pandemic. And they ended up to be like 3-hour Zooms. And you guys all know how you feel about Zooms. But it was still fun. Like we still got to know each other, and I've been able to meet a few in person, like I said. But that nonfiction part was definitely like part of my journey as a writer. And all of my freelance work, almost all of it has been nonfiction. So I think it just makes you a stronger writer. But I had to do a lot of research. Like I love science, but I'm not a scientist. And I couldn't ask them too many questions. Like, can you teach me everything you know about your science? So I would like interview them, have my question set, get all their info, go back, do all the research, like masterclass stuff, and then develop more questions, and then go back and interview them again. And I was really worried about not getting the science right. Like that was so important to me because this is what they've done for their lifeline, this is what they are proud of. And you guys will appreciate this. I sent all the chapters back to the scientists, and some of them were like, oh, it's beautiful, I love it. And then some of them were like professors, no, that's wrong. Yeah. And I had to go back and rewrite, but I was okay with that because I wanted to get it right. So yeah. Okay. What else do we want to know about the amazing Bronwen? Okay, I know you're an artist as well, visual artist. Tell us how art and writing connect.
That's a good question. Well, for me, especially, one of the things I love about writing is you get to create pictures with words. And so it's like painting with language, and finding, and coming from poetry where it's all about picking the exact precise word because you're using so few to form a picture. That's something that, and finding the music of language too. I think those are things that were just embedded in me and what I love. And so then telling a story and getting to create this whole world and unseen world and all these people, and getting to do that visually, that was really fun for me. I think art is sometimes where I go when I can't find my words. And so I do a lot of collage and process and just kind of messy art, expressive art, as well as I'll do some amateur painting too. But a lot of what I do is kind of journaling with, or good painting. I'm taking lessons and getting better all the time. Thank you, daughter. But I think for me, sometimes if I just have feelings and can't get to words, being able to journal visually breaks me through to the other side where I can find words again. Yeah. So I think I love writing for creating pictures. And then I also love pictures for getting me back through to
It
words.
unsticks you somehow, right?
Yes,
Did you
absolutely.
draw the whole neighborhood?
I didn't, and I did not draw this cover, but I worked really closely with the illustrator who did, who was so fantastic. But we went back and forth on like, what does the neighborhood feel like, and
Mhm.
how does it, what should it? So it was really fun to be involved
That's awesome.
and so
Yeah.
hands-on with him, because I think sometimes when you publish a book, they pick your illustrator and they, you choose between a few covers, and that would have been really hard for me, I think,
Yeah.
because I care so much about the visual.
Well, and the illustrator is able to kind of bring their own vision to it as well, which is another magical part of writing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about getting unstuck. So let's talk about writer's block. A lot of people always ask, I have too many ideas. Time is my problem. But when I'm like feeling like I can't write a scene, I usually like, I hate to vacuum and wash the dishes, but I don't know what it is. Something about those two things starts to unwind my brain. Walking my dogs help me, and sometimes taking a shower. So I don't know if it's like that baptism of the water, but what are some things that you do when you feel stuck other than art?
Yes, I do art.
Yeah.
I started, I think I had a poet who told me when I had babies, like walking, you get the rhythm and all the words come. And I had no words when I had babies. And I was so tired. And I kept thinking about that, like, it's so nice for you. I wish the words came when I walked. But now they really do. So now I walk, and I walk fast and hard. And a lot of times I dictate. So I'll dictate journal entries, I'll dictate a whole scene, I'll dictate, and usually I come back and half the words are wrong because I've dictated them and it doesn't make any sense. The other day
I love autocorrect.
right. I drove from LA Friday afternoon in rush hour by accident. And so it took me almost 2.5 hours, and I dictated almost the whole time and had a whole story idea come. And so sometimes being alone and just getting to let my brain move into story rather than just tight daily thinking is really helpful.
Do you ever think about your work before you fall asleep?
Almost never.
Really?
Sometimes in the middle of the night,
Oh yeah.
I'll wake up and then scrawl something
Yeah.
that seems really brilliant. And then in the morning is
Yeah, not so brilliant.
illegible.
My last novel, the one that I got my agent with. So it's basically my father's parents were from Greece. They immigrated here in the 20s. They ended up moving from East to West Coast, had 5 kids. They lived in the housing projects of East LA. And when my dad was 15, his mom died of breast cancer. And then a year later, his father died in surgery. So that left 5 Greek kids orphaned in the projects of East LA in the 1940s. I had heard the stories my whole life, and they were fabulous people. So I interviewed them for about 5 years, turned it into a screenplay, and then turned it into a novel. So this was like my chance to retell my story and those grandparents that I lost or I never knew. But one night, I do think about it a lot before I go to bed, or I'll like read a chapter and then just let it set. But one night I dreamt in my character's voice, and it was spooky. Like I got up and wrote down everything, and it became like the interlude in between like the first and second act of the book. But I was like shaking. Like
Wow.
that had never happened to me before. But sometimes it just becomes so much a part of your psyche, even when you're not thinking about it, you're thinking about it. And I think that's the part of the magic. I keep talking about magic, but like if you're an artist, and it could be music, it could be anything. Like it is just part of your soul, and it's like part of the brain that is just magic. I don't even know how else to describe it.
And you've hit it when you sit down to write. I learned during pandemic, I took a class, and the guy who taught it was talking about writing and how a lot of times when we write, we edit as we go. Like, oh, that's not quite the right word, or let me go back, or let me say that differently. And his whole thing was he uses a method called the Polydoros method that some of you maybe have heard of, but you set the timer for 25 or 30, whatever your block of time is, and you just dump. You don't go back. You don't think. You just tell the story, and then you stop when the timer goes off, and then you take a break, and maybe you're going to do 3 Pomodoro sessions in a row. And then after because you're in the creative part of the brain of generating. And then after you've just gotten all the creative, let your ideas flow, then you can go back and edit, which moves us into the left part of our brain. And I had never heard it described quite so separately. And that has been really valuable to me, of just letting myself, don't think, just tell the story, just go. You might take some of it out later. But that is the part, I think, that is the magic, where I don't know what else is happening in the room. I don't know what time it is. I'm not thinking about one other thing. It's just that deep immersion.
And what else is missing is that little editor that judges us.
So judgy.
We all have that little editor on our shoulders, whether it looks like you or not, it's there. And so you really have to I tell my
Swap it,
students
get
to flick them off and, make sure he ends up through the window, because
Mhm.
if you judge yourself when you write or when you do anything that's important to yourself,
or
it's-
creative.
yeah, it is not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break and see if anyone has questions, and then we'll
Yeah.
do some more tips about writing.
Great.
Does anybody want to ask anything in this awesome Bronwen crowd? Anything about writing or books?
Anything about what you're working on
Yeah.
or imagining? Yeah.
Yes. Question. Learning new things.
He's
So
trying to learn
yeah.
a coding language and wonders if there are any tips for learning new things. That's such a great question.
I think
I was going to jump off what you just said.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think when we are learning something new, especially something we really care about and want to learn about, sometimes we feel a little bit scared. Like, what if I'm not good at this? Oh, I did this wrong. What if I make a mistake? And we shut ourselves down a little bit. And I think just jumping into it and letting yourself make mistakes. Like, of course I'm making mistakes. I'm learning, and just keep going.
And that's actually one of my tips. Remember that every time you make a mistake, that is your opportunity to get better at something. If you don't ever make mistakes, that means you're not trying hard enough, or you're not putting yourself out there in that scary place enough, right? There was a woman in my book. Her name's Clara Yoon. She's Dr. Clara Yoon is at the United States Geological Survey. When she was getting her doctorate, do you guys know the app Shazam? Does anybody use Shazam?
Where you can do the song?
Yeah. So she used that app as like a model to create an app for earthquake waves. So something else you can do is, like, if you're learning something new, look at something that you already know how to do, right? And really think about, okay, what am I good at? What can I do well already? And then try to build on those skills to learn your new tool, if that makes sense. That makes sense? Yeah. But I think the hardest thing is that we judge ourselves. Like, my daughter is super judgmental about herself. She's learning guitar, and she's been like learning on her own for 3 months. And she's like, I'm not good yet. I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm not good yet. I'm like, dude, you know how long it takes to play an instrument? I mean, we're talking, it's like a language, 7 years. Like, it takes a long time to be good at something. And I think they say you have to practice before you even learn something. You have to do it for, is it 60 hours?
A lot of hours.
Or like a habit. I think it's a habit, but like so many, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of doing what you love. And that's how you get better, right? And that's why you want to do it for the right reasons too. Right. So if you love coding, like, you're not going to mind spending all those hours doing it, even if you're making mistakes. Because, and this is something else. I learned so much from these scientists. In the science world, when you make a mistake, it leads you completely in another direction sometimes to something that you didn't even know existed. So you might make a mistake in coding and discover something brand new. And then you're going to become famous. And we're going to say, we knew you when. Right. So you never know where those mistakes can lead you.
Thanks for your question.
Yes.
No, I was just going to say, keep it fun. Like, if you have to do a really hard part for an hour and a half, then give yourself a prize. Like, now I get to jump on the trampoline for 10 minutes or whatever. Yes.
Was it hard for you to find the balance between your child brain and your adult brain to get a childlike story, but get the adult to write it? How does that
Ooh, that's a good question. Was it hard to find the balance between my child brain telling the story in kids' voices and my adult brain and making it hold together? It wasn't. I think maybe because I read so many books in that genre and live with so many of those people, that it actually felt pretty natural. I think there's a part of me that's just happily 12. So
Well, we call that voice, right? Writer's voice. And the more you write, the more you figure out where your like niches, And I think both of us, it's probably like 12 and up, like I write young adult too, but I can't write full on party scenes. Like, I am like that innocent high schooler, or that like a little bit wise middle schooler. Like, I'm right in that little zone when things are still magic before the world has crashed down on you, hopefully,
in a good way.
In a good way.
But I do think there were parts where I really had to give a lot of backstory to make it all make sense. And so it was hard. Those were probably the adult parts where I could have just written for 3 solid pages and had to go back like, that isn't interesting. How do we? So, yeah.
Has any of your books ever been rejected by literature?
Yes. That's a great question. I would say we both have a lot to say about that. Yeah, especially I wrote poetry first and have a book of poems that isn't published yet that I have sent out probably, oh my gosh, 100 times. And that means 100 times it was rejected. And I sent it out for years, and it would just come back, and you just get these little messages back. And it's really hard because this would be writing that I loved and I'd worked so long on and thought, finally, oh, this birthday's coming. This is going to be the year. Oh, this would be a perfect time. This is going to be, and I kept getting rejected. And there was a time where I didn't even realize how much my heart hurt about it. And I stopped writing poetry for a while. And which is actually when I started writing this book. And this book was like a little raft for me, a way to keep writing and telling stories while that poetry part of me was quiet. And then after some years, it unfolded again, and I got to start writing poems. But I think part of trying to put art into the world is knowing it takes a long time. There's a lot of patience, which I think is one of the hardest parts. And actually, Lori and I, when we first met, we would meet right side by side at a coffee shop. And Lori was working on the story about her Greek family. And we were talking about it. And I remember you said you had worked on it for years at that point, 10 years or 8 years or something. And that voice for the last 5 years has been in my head of, oh, it's okay to work on a story for a long, long time. It doesn't get too long. You get to keep working on it until it's done. So you actually
it makes us a little crazy, but yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah, but you are a big encouragement. That's really been a voice that I've come back to. Yeah. Anything about rejection?
Yeah, I think like I'm old. So when I first started writing, we actually got letters back in the mail, and they would say, and they wouldn't even say like, oh, this is a great story, we're just not into it. They would just print out a generic form, and it just like made your heart drop. Right?
And in poetry, they were squares and they would cut them crooked. Like they didn't even care.
Yeah. And they still kind of don't care. But if you're lucky, you'll get a nice rejection once in a while. But I think for me, because it's like putting your soul out there. Like, have you ever like shown a friend like who you really are, and then they either like totally ignored you or they didn't respond the way you wanted them to? You know, it's kind of like that. Like, you're like, I just put my soul out there, and you're like squashing it, you know? So I tell a lot of the kids I work with that you have to be an armadillo. What do armadillos have on their backs? Tough skin, tough shells, right? And you have to be like that because, like we said, every time you get rejected, that's an opportunity to make your work better. And if you didn't get rejected, you just might think it was the greatest thing in the world, right? And it's not. Like, writing is a process. It takes critique groups. It takes other people reading your work, because what's in here doesn't always come out on the page. Right. So it's actually a really good thing. I just wish my rejections hadn't lasted so long. Literally, like if I stacked them up like 3 times the roof, you know, like I've gotten a lot of rejections, but I'm a different writer now than I was 2 decades ago. So they were right, you know. Yeah. So,
thank you. That was a good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
So how do you deal with feedback from reliable people that might not resonate with the voice or the story you're trying to tell?
How do you deal with feedback you get from fellow writers or people you respect reading your work if you don't agree with it? Kind of, is that?
Yeah, or it means like changing everything, or I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, I have a friend who's writing a novel, and she just had to change the speaker's voice. It was in third person, and she's putting it into first person, and it is such a huge job because her editor suggested it, and she realized, ooh, it makes it better. So sometimes it takes a giant amount of work. Yeah, I did do that a little bit too in my book. I think in critique groups, it's funny because you could take, I mean, what I've learned over all the years is you could take a piece of writing and take it to 4 critique groups and get 40 different sets of opinions because it's so subjective. So there's something in the craft where, oh, actually, you really do need to, this is from Tessa's point of view, and now we're all of a sudden in Gus's head. Thank you. That is right. I need to fix that. But also some of it's just opinions and our sensibilities, which are different. So it's always really important for me when I walk into a critique group to take a minute to remember who I am and what my voice is, because it's easy to get really scrambled and confused with a lot of input in any area of life, I think. And sometimes sometimes I go home and I want to make all the changes right away, but just to sit with it a little bit and see what kind of falls down and what stays loud about feedback.
Yeah, I think just taking it in and saying thank you and not trying to defend yourself.
Which is hard.
Yeah. And then, like Bronwen said, letting it set and going back. And if you get the same comments from 2 or 3 people, there's probably something there, And a lot of times your first reaction is they're wrong. What are they? They don't know my story, And then you go back and you're like, oh, I think they're right. Yeah. So it is a humbling experience. It really is. But that's what you want. You want people to be honest. You don't want everyone to say it's great when it's not, right?
And to push you to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I used to play tennis, and it's like I always played better when I was playing with someone better than me, right? So you really want that feedback from people you trust or people that know story or know the market or whatever. There's so many ways to know. But I absolutely believe that my critiques have made my work better every time. Yeah. And sometimes you get letters, like editors will send you letters, single spaced, like 7 pages. And you're like, what? And so I use color coding system. I highlight everything a different color for character, for plot, for pacing, or I'll number which ones are easiest. Some people do the easy stuff first and then the hard. There's so many different ways to do it. But if you look at it as a whole at first, you just want to melt into the floor. So
because you just want someone to say it's perfect.
Yeah. But we're hoping to get there with all these comments. That's the goal. Yeah. Right. Good question.
Any other questions? Okay, let's just do a couple more things.
Yeah. Tell us about your favorite authors.
I was thinking about this. I read around so much. There are few authors I just follow, but I really love Jean Birdsall, who wrote the Penderwicks. And Maeve and I have just been rereading those, and I love how she captures family and playfulness and all of her characters. I just read the middle grade book Nevermore. Who's that by? Do you know? Oh, Jessica Townsend. And she has her characters have the very best names, like Jupiter North and Dame Chanda, and it's a whole magical world. It's more fantasy. But really fun. So I think I just love reading around and discovering new voices and unexpected people that I hadn't heard of. I love Coyote Sunrise this year. I really loved. I just bought his new book, Game and Heart, I think is his name. I'm also not good at names with anyone famous.
How long does it take you? If you find a book and you're like, I think this looks good, will you read it even if you're not into it? Or how long does it take you before you're like, nope, next?
I won't read it if I'm not into it. Yeah, I feel like life is too short and there's so many books. So I'll start it. And if it doesn't quite catch me, I'll usually...
How many chapters does it take you?
I give it a few. I mean, I'm not going to make the decision in the first chapter. Yeah. But we read that, what was that weird book? The Stranger, he came to your house. He was your... Yes, Antoine Wilson. He wrote the weirdest book. Where sort of nothing happens the whole time and also something is happening and you're waiting for something to happen. And that was a book I might not have gone all the way through if it hadn't been for Candy. But at the end, it was like, I'm still thinking about it. It was like a weird enough journey that I was glad I took it. Yeah. Who are your favorite?
There's been one book that I've read in the last 5 years that has stuck with me. It's called The Bone Gap. It's by Laura Ruby. And it's about these 2 boys who their father has passed away. They live with mom. Mom gets a boyfriend, and the boyfriend doesn't like the 2 boys. So he gives her an ultimatum, and she leaves. So she leaves the 2 boys in this little town called the Bone Gap to live on their own. The oldest is 19, and the youngest is 16, or the other 16. And in their cornfield one day, this magical girl appears, and they both kind of fall in love with her. And then one day, he sees her disappear, and it's this man in this tall black hat that takes her. And I was reading, loving it, and then it had this twist, and I love to be surprised. And there's a Greek mythology twist. So kind of everything I write has a Greek mythology twist in it somewhere. And she just did it so smoothly, and she surprised me, and the way she integrated this Greek myth really impressed me. And it has been the best book that I have read in the last 5 years. Yeah, but I try to read everything that's out there, and all of our local authors with SCWI I tried to read, and everything that you read, there's always something that I take away from it. And I keep notes, like what did I learn from this book? Yeah. And it just enriches my life in so many ways. Yeah. What about TV shows? Do you have a favorite TV show or movie?
I mean, I really love Ted Lasso. I go to TV and movie for levity. So I feel like the heaviness is already in the world. Yes. And so those are places I really go for levity. Yeah. So that was some buoyant company.
Yeah, I agree.
during those seasons. Yeah.
Okay.
What are if you were going to give a couple tips on writing, what would they be? And we've talked about a couple of them, but I wonder also if they dovetail with tips on life.
Yeah, I feel like writing has become a metaphor for me. I've been through some hard stuff this year with my own 2 children, and I think writing has saved me. It sounds like corny when you say it, but being able to create a world where people have empathy and where characters have humongous obstacles, but they get over them, with the help of their family. And like the young adult novel I'm working on now, they both have really loving parents, so I can create these worlds that matter to me and that I have control of. And it lets me go to this other place where I'm kind of healing myself. So I don't know, so I don't know if all of you like writing, but find the thing that you can do that like puts something beautiful into the world, but also can heal you at the same time, whether it's sports or hiking or painting or being with your dogs, like whatever it is. Like, I think it's really important to acknowledge what it is, because life's hard. Being a grown up is hard. Being a kid is hard. So I think for me, I've been fortunate enough to find the thing that makes me want to keep going even when it's hard, Yeah. So maybe that's one tip we haven't really talked about. Yeah. What about you? Anything else?
I would say, hi, Melamas. I mean, sort of what we talked about with the critic, but one thing I love about writing is, and one piece of advice is just write and write and write and write and write before you edit yourself. And also write something you love and write characters you love, because I started writing something the other day and I started really not liking the story, and I had to pull over and you don't have to write that story. You got to write a story. Oh yeah, I'm going to write a story I love. And I think, and as I was thinking about that with tips on life too, like, take all the time you can to be with your people that you love. And then the other challenge is learning how to love the people you don't want to be with, which those people have to be in your books too.
Anybody have any other questions before we do a little reading from our books? Or do you have any other questions,
No, I
Bronwen?
think that's great.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot.
There are chairs up here if you guys want to be on chairs, Melamas, if that feels more comfortable. And you maybe can squeeze into shade over there. You can move my bag.
Oh, I know what I want to
things.
ask you. What
Oh,
are
yeah.
you working on now, or what's next for you?
That's been a big question mark that I didn't know the answer to. I have a young adult novel I've started that I love and I'm very tangled in and don't completely know where the story is going to go, but I really love the characters and what's happening in it. But just the other day, when I was in rush hour from LA, I kind of got the whole storyline for a sequel. So I started playing with that this morning. I know, so that might be fun. What about you?
I'm finishing a young adult novel now. It's a beast. It's like 104,000 words. I finished a second revision, so I'm going on a third. It's a dual point of view, dual time period. So basically, it's a guy and a girl, 200 years apart, fall in love and have to help each other change the world, pretty much. But it's been really hard because it's like this massive puzzle. Each chapter alternates not only character but time period, and it's set in Joshua Tree, which is one of my favorite places. And it all revolves around this golden retriever that helps intersect them in time. But it's like this puzzle, and I'm not a puzzle person. But I'm hoping to send it to my agent in the next few days. Bless you. And then I'm going back to work on the Greek story because I want to give it another fighting chance. I'll be going to a retreat in Pennsylvania to work on that one. Yeah. So, yeah. And then I have another series that I started starring Medusa and her 2 sisters, the 2 Gorgon sisters, and they have to solve mysteries around the world. So the first one's set in Venice, Italy. Yeah. So that's the next thing I'll do.
And you should go on a research trip.
I did. I went last year, but I want to go back for sure. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do quick readings. I know it's very hot on this
I
patio.
know.
So if there's anyone, particularly I have several family members and people here. If you need to go for a walk, stretch, you're not going to hurt our feelings if you need to resituate or go buy a popsicle.
Yeah, you go
Do
first.
you want to go? You want
No,
me to
you
go
go
first?
first, yeah.
Okay, I mean it. I know you can't get away from it. Where are my purple marks? Okay. I'm going to read just a little part of the story. So what happens in this story is there are two neighbors named Tessa and Gus who have just finished sixth grade, and they've met the mysterious neighbor, Professor Henchworth, in their neighborhood, who has given them something called a Vider, which is on the cover. And it is just a palm-sized telescope. And they don't know what it does, and they don't know why they have it. So far, it seems to do nothing. It's the last day of school. They've just gotten out. They've walked up to the corner store to buy giant pieces of grape gum. And they begin to discover something about the Vider. So we got a loud truck. Here we go. And Gus and Tessa, next door neighbor, best friends. They have just finished sixth grade. Yeah. So the store on the corner a few blocks from school had a jar of the most fantastically huge pieces of grape bubble gum wrapped like taffy in a jar on the counter. Tessa and Gus liked to compete and see who could blow a bubble big enough to cover their entire faces. Last summer, Tessa had blown a bubble so big that it had stuck in her bangs. Pulling and combing had only made it worse. She'd even tried using peanut butter and Vaseline to get it out, which was disgusting and didn't help. She'd had to cut the gum out, which had left her bangs so short they jutted straight out from her forehead. But that didn't stop her from trying to beat Gus again. Tessa pushed open the old door and the bell jingled overhead. As she walked to the counter, she dug for crumpled dollars in the bottom of her backpack. Gus yanked a handful of quarters and the Vider from his own bag. "Hey, remember this thing?" he asked, holding it out. "That does not feel like it was yesterday," Tessa said, as Gus paid for 8 pieces of gum with his coins. Tessa gave up looking for dollars, and they each popped 2 pieces in their mouths and wandered further into the store. Gus sampled from the boxes of berries they passed. "Berries and grape gum can only make it better," he said, blowing a bubble that was swirled with strawberry juice and seeds. "Disgusting," Tessa cried. "Hey, maybe the Vider works differently inside," Gus asked, holding it up to his eye and looking around the store. "What the?" Gus was staring intently at a woman choosing cucumbers. "It's doing something." "What's it doing?" Tessa bounced impatiently. "I don't know," said Gus, lowering the Vider and trying again. "That woman's all colors, but they're moving. It's cool. Let me see." Tessa pulled his arm. Gus raised and lowered the Vider a few more times and then handed it to her. "Whoa, what is that?" Tessa asked, looking at the same woman. She couldn't see the woman's insides, not her organs or bones, but something else. Her body and head were filled with a cloudy substance. It was almost all yellow, but a stormy shade of yellow, peaked with greens and browns. The woman's forehead was furrowed. Somehow Tessa could see both the outside and inside of her at once, and the stuff inside of her reminded Tessa of a churning ocean. The woman glanced up. "Do you need something?" she asked in an irritated tone. Sorry," Tessa stammered, backing awkwardly away. "Sorry." She and Gus ducked down the first aisle. "I guess we were kind of obvious," said Gus. "Awkward," Tessa sang. From where they stood, they could see the front of the store and the tall high school boy who bagged groceries. People always got mad at him for fumbling the produce and packing the soft bread and bananas under heavy cans. Tessa looked at him through the Vider and watched him change. The boy's whole body vibrated, and Tessa could almost hear a buzzing noise. No wonder the kid's hand shook when he bagged groceries. His whole body was full of a metallic static that shook even his eyes. "Oh," said Tessa, "that looks like it feels awful." She handed the Vider to Gus, who cringed as he looked at the shaking boy. "What do I look like?" Tessa asked, brightening. Gus turned the Vider toward her. "What is it?" Tessa asked, bouncing up and down. "Oh, it's fire. Not actual fire, but flames. They're pink and red and orange and gold, leaping all over the place." "Can you see my face also?" she asked, sticking out her tongue. "Yeah, Tessa." She was making her zombie face and started laughing. "When you laugh, everything gets brighter for a second. Make another face." Tessa squatted down with her arms tucked in her armpits and walked like a duck until she lost her balance and knocked 3 cereal boxes to the floor with her knee. "Did it work?" "Yeah," said Gus, laughing at Tessa as she scrambled to get the boxes back on the shelf, knocking another 2 off as she did. "Let me see you," Tessa said, hopping up. She snatched the Vider from Gus. "This thing is so cool. What do I look like?" Gus asked. "Everything is moving. It's hard to explain, but blue, all sorts of blues and greens. It's like when we went whitewater rafting on the school campout. It's water like that. It's like there's a current, even though it's inside your body." As Tessa and Gus moved through the store, Tessa imagined them full of flames and rapids and felt kind of proud. Ahead of them, a woman stood at the deli counter ordering pastrami. She wore red lipstick and her bleached blonde hair pulled tightly into a high ponytail. Her face had a striking quality and also a fierceness to it. "Let's check her out," Gus suggested. As Tessa viewed her through the visor, the woman instantly became a black wisp of smoke and vanished. Tessa lowered the visor to see if the woman had moved, but she still stood in exactly the same place. Again, Tessa looked through the visor, and again, the woman turned to smoke. "Crazy," Tessa muttered under her breath. She turned to the butcher. Blue and green orbs of all sizes filled his body like live bubbles. Unlike the stormy woman, his colors rose and popped in a cheery way. Tessa glanced back once more at the blonde woman, and again she poofed into smoke. "What in the world?" Tessa wondered aloud. Just as Gus was about to ask what she'd seen, the blonde woman snapped her head around and glared at them so severely that the two children jumped back, turned around, and ran straight outside. Gasping for breath at the end of the block, Tessa and Gus looked at each other. "We just ran away from a woman ordering pastrami," Tessa burst out. "She was terrifying," Gus said, laughing, and they collapsed on a bench, and Tessa unwrapped another piece of gum as Gus pulled out his sketchbook. Stop there. Thanks.
There's so much I liked about that. I love their relationship, their fun, playful relationship. I love the Viter. Is it called Viter? The Viter in like this new world. It opens up, and then I love the tension and the pacing. And she's scary, yeah. So, what would you look like if we looked at you through the Viter?
This has been a fun activity I've been doing with kids. And one of the best things that's happened since I wrote this book is I got letters from 3 sisters who are ages 7. How old is Josie? 7, 8, 7 to 12 probably. And they all wrote them. And I read them oldest to youngest just by accident. And the youngest one wrote, I was imagining you through the Viter, and I think you would look like spring, and drew a picture. And I bawled. I just cried my little eyes out. But I think when we were doing it, I was picturing myself with lots of colors and swirls, especially I'm a real deep feeler. And then kind of muddier, darker colors in my hands and feet.
Rejection.
Because that's where, no, it's grounding. Because those are my grounding places where I walk, where I create, where I use my hands. And these are all sort of the thoughts and the swirls, and then hands and feet were sort of grounding. But it's been fun to try to imagine ourselves.
Did you draw any of the characters, like how you saw them through the Viter?
No, not before I wrote it. I mean, I pictured them all and I drew it with words, but no. But yeah, my mom read a story to us when we were growing up, my brothers and me, that had this ring of torches. And when people walked into the ring of torches, they were revealed as they really were. And the main boy had so much shame, and he had this big scar. And so the whole book, you're just wishing he would walk into the circle because he's this beautiful. And I was so taken. I mean, just always that idea of like, but what do we really look like? There's so much focus on our external,
You
but
can see the artist part of you created the visual element of that. Yeah, very cool. Okay, so mine is the complete opposite, but I'm just going to read the way the book's structured. There's a foreword in the beginning, and then there are 15 chapters, 1 chapter per scientist, and then there's an afterword. So I'm just going to read the afterword, and it's very quick. So the subtitle is Find Your Passion. Many of the women in this book had no idea they would end up as scientists, studying how the processes of the earth can lead to earthquakes, tsunamis, or volcanic eruptions. As girls, most of them hated math, whether it was due to a learning disability or discouragement from a teacher. Others were never ushered into science as kids. They might have been curious about the world, but due to traditional social expectations or gender or racial bias, they didn't have models or mentors to look up to. Maybe their path into earthquake science was a total coincidence. They might have started out in a different career or major, and because of an earthquake, their plans were shaken up, topsy-turvy, like social scientist Kate Gonzalez-Long or geologist Dr. Wendy Bohan. Suddenly, they wanted to help fix things that were broken or help people through struggles like Dr. Jenny Nakai. Maybe with encouragement from their family and friends like Dr. Anne-Marie Balte-Sundstrom or Carolina Rojas, these women wanted to be adventurous and take risks, or just see deeper through advanced technology like Dr. Clara Yoon, see farther and wider within the earth like Dr. Peggy Helwig and Dr. Susan Huff, uncover mysteries from under the ocean like Dr. Valerie Sahakian or Dr. Lori Dangler, and peer into deadly volcanoes like Debbie Weiser or Beth Bartel. You see where this is going, right? Life doesn't always go as planned. Often the path you think you're on leads you somewhere totally unexpected. Yet whatever path you choose, make sure it belongs to you. Don't be afraid to try new things. Carve out your road and mix it up. Many of these women took non-traditional paths into science or communications or combined different interests and passions to create a whole new place for themselves in their fields. And you've heard it before, but they all expected to fail throughout their career. They learned to grow from it and to be excited about the surprises and the unexpected things that came with it. So keep your eyes open, find what makes your heart skip, and do your research. It might be science or math, or maybe you love words, animals, dance, history, coding. Oh, got coding in here. The sky's the limit. It's up to you. Your passion, your dreams, your life. Time to get living. Yeah.
I love it. That was your advice, right?
Yes, I know. Yeah.
It's so wild how our generation and earlier, what a stumbling block it really was to be a mathematician or to move into. So I like to think it's so different now.
Yeah, it
and
is.
even just
If I would have
like
had these women, I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be an archaeologist, a marine biologist, and a zoologist. And then I took physics and chemistry, and it was like, woo, that is not where I belong. But if I would have had them, I could have understood that, oh, I can get a degree in social science and then a master's in, biology. And then I can use those skills and build on what I can do well to become a scientist. Yeah. So now I just write about scientists, but but I really value them as mentors, and that's why I'm super excited to tell their stories. Yeah. Okay. Any final questions from anyone? I see one of my amazing students, Jasmine. Yay. Hi, Jasmine. Anything else you're dying to know?
Thank you so much for coming
I
and for sitting with us
know.
this whole time.
Yes.
So happy. We're going to be at the table right on the other side of this wall, signing books.
And thank you for
talk to
allowing
us.
me to crash this fun party. No, seriously, it inspires us just being
Yes.
able to share what's up here and what's in here with you all. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Did your friends get a picture? Or should we take another one?
We should. Will you? Did we take pictures?
Let's get
Eden's
a
gonna
picture.
get one.
I got some. Then we need another.
You want to use my phone?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yours is right.
Putting that
Will you
on.
be on the front so we
Yeah.
can
Hold up your other. You want to hold up your phone?